Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Talking Cardboard. My name is Cory, and here we go. The cream of the crop, getting higher and higher on my list of top 50 favorite board games of all time. Today's list are games number 20 up to number 11. Let's get started. And here we are, finally, the top 20 games of all time, 20 through 11, getting really close to the top 10 games of all time. These games are really the cream of the crop. These are the best of the best, the games that I'm most excited to talk about here today, so I'm very excited to bring this content to you. As always, if you like the content here on the channel, consider subscribing. It's just a click of a button, but it really helps us out, really goes a long way on the channel here and keeps us going, so really appreciate the subscribes. Like the video, comment in the comment section below. All those things help the YouTube algorithm. That'll really help drive the channel. Every little bit you can do to help us out really goes a long way, so we really do appreciate that. In the comments below, leave your favorite games of all time. We'd really like to see what games are your favorites. If there's some games that we haven't played before, we would love to give them a try, get them to the table, review some of those for you, and give you our thoughts on that as well. So we really like interacting with the community and discovering new games that we haven't played yet that are some of your favorites. So like I said, leave them in the comments below. We'd love to interact with you down below there. In line with that, also, we are starting our Patreon channel here soon, which, if you can donate $1 or $2 or up to $5 a month or any sort of pledge level that you can contribute, if possible, if at all possible, every little bit helps with that to keep the camera footage getting better, the sound quality getting better, maybe helping us fund getting to more conventions, because that's our next step here with the channel, is getting to more conventions to provide live coverage of these conventions for you all, so that if you don't have the means or don't have the time to get to these conventions, that maybe we can and provide that live footage for you so you can see what it's like. Also, one more tidbit of information before we get started here is that John from Talking Cardboard has also been posting his top 20 favorite games of all time with his first segment, 20 up to 11. That was just posted to the channel here recently, so make sure you go over there and check that one out as well. And we will be getting together. It'll be me and John and Nick from Talking Cardboard. The three of us are getting together for the top 10 segments, and we're going to split those into two different segments, 10 up to 6 and games 5 up to number 1, and those segments will be coming soon, and we're excited to record all those together to give you just a bunch of different games of our favorite games of all time. So really it'll be like essentially a top 30 of our top 10 list of all time, given that it's the three of us. So we're excited for that. Without further ado, let's get to game number 20. Alright, my game number 20 is new to the list this year, and I've been getting it played a lot recently. It's a World War II themed deck building game called Undaunted Normandy. Undaunted Normandy is just fantastic. It is a lot of fun. It is on the lighter scale of war games that, out of all the war games out there, which I really do appreciate. It's very easy to jump into. Like I said, it's got a deck building element to it, so it's really cool how you are bolstering troops to your deck, and the cards represent the different troops that you've got and how big your troop of that certain unit is, and you have a hand of cards that tell you what actions you can do with these different units. There's a central board, a central map that you are trying to send out your tokens to different regions to control different areas on the board. You can play either as the Americans or the Germans, and there's a bunch of different scenarios. It's not really, quote unquote, a campaign style game. It's more of just a scenario based game, and you can play the same scenario over and over again. So that's another thing I really appreciate about this game as well. But really the mechanisms of deck building and playing a card down, moving your units around, trying to attack other units, and trying to control different regions of the map is just so streamlined and smooth in this game that it's very easy to jump into for anybody. And I would suggest maybe this be your first war game. If you haven't really dove into war games before, I would suggest maybe this being your introduction to war games, because it is just that clean of a system. I do have Undaunted North Africa, which is an expansion that introduces some vehicles and other map tiles and stuff like that. And I do have the Reinforcements pack also, which at the core of this game, it is a 1 versus 1 game, but that actually made it go up to 2 versus 2, which we have tried with the Talking Cardboard crew, and that was a lot of fun as well. So I can't recommend the expansions enough. Just so great. They also just came out with a brand new expansion that's almost more of a legacy version to the game called Undaunted Stalingrad. And actually John from Talking Cardboard got that version of the game, and that's playing more through a strict campaign. And as your units die, you are actually having to bring other units or other people to your deck, because the other ones that had died previously stayed dead, and it incorporates some new elements to that game which sound really cool that I want to give a shot. But anyway, that is the Undaunted system. Definitely give one of them a try. I highly recommend it. My alternative pick for this spot on the list is Commands and Colors Napoleonics. Commands and Colors system is another streamlined system to war games, which I really appreciate. You can kind of sense the theme here. I like my war games being a little bit more streamlined and simplified, easier to get to the table, not as much rules overhead, because I do like introducing games to new players a lot. So that is one thing I look for in games in general, and Commands and Colors definitely has it. I would recommend either the Commands and Colors Napoleonics, which I have, or Commands and Colors Ancients, which I hear is even a little bit more simplified that you might be able to start with as well. But Napoleonics I've played a lot, is a ton of fun. It is a block war game, so you have these really thick, chunky, heavy wooden blocks for your troops, and depending on the type of troop, those will give you different actions with those troops. And then also what I really like too is that the blocks are just very easy to see on the map. You can see at a glance on how strong a squad is just by looking at it on the board, because the more block pieces there are in a zone means the stronger the squad is in that zone. And just trying to, again, vie for control over different spots, and also trying to tactically maneuver your entire warband of blocks is a lot of fun. Just can't recommend it enough for a streamlined war style game. So that is Commands and Colors Napoleonics, but in the spot for this time, the game that wins out is Undaunted Normandy. Number 19 is also a brand new game to the list this year, and it is a game that I don't have an alternate pick for, unfortunately, because the game is just that unique and that different, but that's what also makes it great. And this game is Brian Boru, the High King of Ireland. This game mixes trick-taking with area control. I know you've probably never heard of that before, because I don't think it's really been done before, but they gave it a try. The designers of this game tried to kind of mix that trick-taking mechanism with area control on a map, and boy, does it work really well. It doesn't sound like it would work, but it does work. The trick-taking is not really trick-taking in a traditional sense. It's got a little bit of a twist to it, but it has some trick-taking feel to it, or some trick-taking elements to it with the card play from your hand. Essentially, there are different suits of cards that are all different colors, and depending on what region you want to take over, there are different colors on the map for those regions, or for those areas that you're trying to take over. If you follow a trick, let's say somebody plays down a blue card and you're following with another blue card, whoever played the highest valued blue card out of their hand that turn wins the trick and essentially takes over that zone on the map. Like I said, you're trying to vie for area control and area majority in these different regions for endgame victory points to essentially win the game. But another cool thing about this game is that all the cards are multi-use cards, which I really like in games as well. Multi-use is one of my favorite mechanisms of all time, and these cards have that on them. Because if you don't follow suit, or let's say you follow suit but you don't win with the highest value card, you don't take over the region on that map, but you get to trigger the special ability that's on that card instead. And the special ability is vying for control over like the religion track, or the war track with bolstering more troops in that area, or getting married over on that other track, and how well you do on all of those will also gain you some advantages in taking over these regions as well. So it's not just solely about the area control on the main map, but you also have to pay attention to the other things on the game board that'll help you gain those victories in those different regions. So really cool how this plays out. Some minor trick-taking elements, which are kind of neat in a twist to trick-taking, but also some multi-use cards, which is a lot of fun as well. So that is Brian Boru. Okay, my number 18 game was number 25 last year, so staying pretty strong and steady, just slipping a little bit, but this game, for it being how old it is, I still really enjoy it and highly recommend it. It is one of my favorite worker placement games of all time. This game is Viticulture, the Essential Edition. In Viticulture, you're essentially running your own vineyard. You are buying your own plots of land, planting grapevines on that land and gathering grapes. You're mashing the grapes to create different kinds of wine, like either red wine or white wine or sparkling wine or blush wine, and all these different versions of the wine, because at its heart, you are trying to fulfill contracts. You have people that are coming to your vineyard that want specific types of wine, and you're trying to give the people what they want for victory points. There are worker placement spots in in the expansion, it's spring, summer, fall, and winter, but in the base game, it's just the summertime and the winter time, and you have different actions depending on what season it is. Essentially, a lot of the actions revolve around gathering cards for the contracts, or gathering the grapes, or making the grapes in that whole wine process. And it's very cutthroat because there's only a certain number of spots on each action that you can send your worker to, and if all of them fill up, you can't go there any longer. So you're really kind of racing to what you want to get to before the other players take your spot, and it's just really thematic, really cool. You've got different action cards that you can get to your hand and play during different seasons in the game, and those will give you different advantages and actions as well. And essentially, at its heart, you are just trying to fulfill these contracts for those victory points for some residual income. Money's really tight in this game, so you're trying to get that income coming in every round as kind of like a cash flow to help you, with your plans as well. So Viticulture Essential Edition is really, really good. I do have the Tuscany Essential Edition expansion to this game as well. And that adds, a little bit too, like I said, with the 4 different seasons instead of just 2 parts to the board, and it adds some other, a new orange deck of cards and just some more goodness to the game. I wouldn't necessarily start with the Tuscany expansion, like a lot of people on the internet are saying, just throw in Tuscany right away and go for it. I still think the base game is just fine enough to start with your first handful of plays before you ever even think about getting the expansion. So that is Viticulture. My alternate pick for this spot on the list is another worker placement game, and another one of my favorite worker placement games of all time, and this game is Stone Age. Stone Age, I believe it was the first worker placement game I had ever played, and it just really wowed me. It took me by storm. It's such a great game. And another simple one. I would say Viticulture is a little bit heavier, a little bit more strategic than Stone Age, but Stone Age, it being a little bit lighter, still provides a lot of strategy. It's a high scoring type of game, so the end scores will end in like the 200s or 300s. So if you like scoring points for a bunch of different things, Stone Age definitely has that, which is really neat and really fun. In Stone Age, it's got kind of that contract fulfillment feel to it, just like in Viticulture. That's why I'm putting it on the spot on this list here, where you've got cards that you are trying to fulfill these little contracts with, gathering resources and getting those resources to those cards, and also building out these huts. Because you're back in the Stone Age, you need shelter to protect yourself. So building huts for victory points as well. The really cool mechanism that I like in Stone Age is sending your workers to different locations to gather those resources. And depending on how many workers you send to a location is how many dice you get to roll to try to gather resources. And the resources have a varying level of difficulty. So for example, if you're going after the wood or the brick, it's a little bit less difficult than if you're going after stone or even gold, like panning for gold in the river. Those are very difficult. They have different divisible factors to them. So for example, if I send out 3 workers to go gather wood, wood is divisible by 3. So if I send those 3 workers out, or 2 workers, then I roll the 3 or 2 dice depending on how many workers I send. I add the total together of the dice value rolled, and I divide it by 3, and rounding down, that's how much wood I get to gather. But for example, if you're up to stone, it's divisible by 5, or even up to gold, it's divisible by 6. So you're really trying to push your luck with how many workers you think it'll take to gather the resources you need, or maybe push your luck with 1 or 2 fewer workers than you think you need, just to maybe get something out of it so you can send your workers off elsewhere to do other things for you. So it's got a little bit of push your luck in the game, which is really neat. But yeah, just everything going on in Stone Age is a lot of fun. Definitely comparable to Viticulture. Viticulture wins out on this spot on the list this time, but they are kind of similar. I just think Viticulture hits the table more often for me now because it is got a little bit more strategic complexity to it, which I look for in a game nowadays with the position I'm in with my gaming career. So that is Viticulture. Okay, my number 17 is another game that I don't have an alternate pick for because it is another unique game that I just couldn't think of anything else that would be in a similar spot for it. But this game is Bruges, or the new version is called Hamburg, which was just reprinted recently. But it is a Stefan Feld game, and Stefan Feld is one of my all-time favorite designers. He just makes fantastic games that I really enjoy. I really enjoy most of his games, to be real honest. And the way he designs games is that it's got that point salad type feel to them, just like some of the other games I had mentioned, where every little thing you're doing, you are getting victory points for, which is a lot of fun. Some people don't really like that aspect of it. Some people like the challenge of trying to barely squeeze out 1 or 2 victory points here or there and mustering everything together to just get enough just to get by. And I do like that and appreciate that in a lot of games as well. But I do also like games that every little thing you're doing, you're getting a positive reward or positive feedback for, because it just makes it a little bit more fun, in my opinion. So in Bruges, the main mechanisms with this game is that multi-use card system that I had talked about a little bit earlier, where I just love multi-use cards. And this game takes it to the next level, where on each multi-use card, or each card from your hand, it's got like 5 or 6 different actions you can do with it. And every little action you're doing is valuable in the game. The main use for the cards that you can see right away by looking at them is that each card has a different person on them that has a unique ability to it that you can play down in front of you in your tableau of cards to try to create some engine building aspects to the game. But it's not just that simple. Actually, the back of the card has the back of each card has a picture of a house on it, because one of the actions you can do with your card is spend a worker of a color. Let's say you're spending a yellow worker. You can take a yellow card from your hand, flip it face down onto the table, and that card becomes a house for you. So you can play one of the people cards from your hand face up into that house, because the people need a house to live in before you're allowed to play them. And like I said, each person has a special ability on it that you can trigger throughout the game that'll help you get victory points in different ways. You've got these dice that you're rolling out onto the main board at the beginning of each round as well. And the values of the different color of dice will tell you how much money you can gain from those dice as well. So for example, if the red die is showing a value of 3 and I discard a red card, I could use that card not only for a person or for a house, but let's say I just discard it for money, I would take 3 money because there's 3 money on that red die. So that's for example is how you can gain some money. Another thing too is that any of the 5s and 6s that are rolled on the dice are sending threats your way. So depending on the color of 5s and 6s that were rolled, that color threat will come your way. And if you get 3 threats of a specific color, then something bad will happen to you. Like you'll have to discard a person because the rat infestation made them, flee away, or you'll have to burn down one of your houses, or a flood will come and you might lose all your money. And there's just a bunch of different bad things that you could happen to you. So you have to manage those threats wisely. And you're discarding cards of those colors to manage those threats, but also trying to build houses and put people in those houses for special abilities, and trying to manage everything you're doing to gain as many victory points as possible while keeping the threats from getting too strong and affecting you to the fullest extent. So that balance between the threats and the good things that are happening and the multi-use cards is just really fun in Bruges. I do have the new version, Hamburg, which I haven't played yet, which tweaks a couple things, but really I think essentially they're pretty close to the same game with just some minor streamlined tweaks that the designers and the developers decided to do now that the game is a little bit older. So that is Bruges. All right, my number 16 game was number 9 last year, so falling just out of the top 10, unfortunately, but still number 16, still really high up there, still a cream of the crop game for me, and this game hits the table a lot. Hits the table a lot with the Talking Cardboard crew. It hits the table a lot with, our friends during our Extra Life fundraiser. We do an Extra Life fundraiser every year, raising money for the children's hospitals, and this game goes over well at those events every single time. This game is Stockpile. It is a stock market style game, but don't turn off the video. Stay here with me. Stay here with me. It is just a great stock market game where you have some hidden information and some bidding going on in the game. And those two things are really cool how they work together. In Stockpile, essentially, you are putting cards down, some cards down face up on the table and some cards on the table face down, and you're putting them in different stacks down on the table to create these stock piles. And then after everyone has done that with their cards, now you've got rows of these stockpiles that you have to bid over. You have one worker, one person that you're bidding over the piles with. And you can, let's say you bid $6 on one of the piles, but somebody outbids you, you get bumped off and then have to bid on a different stockpile. Then if somebody bumps you off that stockpile, you can go back to one of the other ones that you previously bid on, or any of the other ones, and just bidding continues until all players take ownership of their own stockpiles. You take that stockpile to your hand, and based on what you had paid for with that bidding system, that is now your hand of cards that you have to deal with the round. The cards are anywhere from the type of stock, the company, the color of stock, and based on the different values of the stocks on the main board, that'll tell you how much those stocks are worth. So you really want to hang on to the stocks, as long as you can, to have them increase in value enough to the point where you want to sell them for some, big cash. But you have to be careful, because if that company goes bankrupt, you lose all those shares of your stock to the discard pile. So it's really cool how that system works. And another thing too is there are some cards that you can put down hidden that are tax cards, so you have to pay taxes, or some cards that'll actually boost or take down the value of certain stocks. So you might have a +2 green card that you got to your hand, to where you can play that down as an action on your turn and increase the value of one of those stocks by 2 on the chart. So now you might have had that stock that you just increased, so now the value is that much better, so then you might want to sell it. Also, every person at the beginning of the round has a hidden company that shows what that company's value of the stock is going to be doing, whether it's going down or up or staying the same. So you have some hidden information or insider information that if you just start dumping off one type of stock, so you might tip off to the rest of the players around the table that stock might be going way down in value next turn. So they might now start selling off that stock. But if you do it secretively enough to where you're not making it too obvious, you might fly under the radar, get your money for it, and then the other players that are stuck with that stock now in the future either have to sell it for a lower value, or if the company goes bankrupt, they lose all the shares of that stock. So it's cool having that insider information and bidding for the different stock cards, and then everything that's going on with it. And it's a very quick playing game with everything that's going on as well. So that's what I appreciate about Stockpile. My alternate pick for this list is another kind of stock style game with some hidden information in a way and some bidding. So it's got that hidden information element and the bidding element to it. And this game is called QE, or quantitative easing. And basically this is more of a party version to Stockpile, where in QE, you are bidding over these company tiles that have a set number of victory points on it. On your dry erase board, you can bid any dollar amount you want, put it face down, flip them all over, and whoever bid at the highest dollar on that company gets that tile in front of them and gets that many victory points. And whoever has the most victory points at the end of the game is the winner. But what makes this really crazy is that whoever in total bid the most amount of money throughout the entire game automatically gets eliminated and kicked out of the game and takes last place. So you have to be, very careful that you're not bidding too much for these victory point company tiles throughout the game, because if you threw the most money at them, you are automatically eliminated and it goes to the second player then. You not only want the most victory points, but you got to be careful with how much you're bidding, and you can bid any amount. You can bid $1 million, $1 billion, or $2. And you don't know what other players are doing. So it kind of turns into having a little bit of a meta game. After a while, you're kind of getting the idea of pretty much the normal amount that people are eventually bidding for certain things. But that all plays into like the mind games and the head games you're playing with all your opponents around the table. And that's a ton of fun too. And QE plays a lot faster than Stockpile, even though Stockpile plays pretty quickly. So if you're looking for more of a party fast style to the hidden information and bidding game, I would pick QE. But still, Stockpile is just so great that it made this spot on the list for me this time. So that is Stockpile. All right, to my number 15 is another brand new game to the list, and this is one of the more difficult games to hit the table, to be real honest. And if you go way back years and years ago, maybe 4 years ago now or so, you can watch our original review of this game, and we gave it a pretty poor rating for the reason that it's just too difficult to get to the table too often, unless you're playing with the same players over and over again. But if you're showing new gamers this game, or playing with different people each weekend, it's kind of hard to get people involved in it and to learn this game. And that's kind of what originally gave it its bad rating. But now after playing it for years and years now, it is becoming more comfortable with us in the gaming group and is now my number 15. So that's saying something. And this game is Root. Root is a war game that is disguised in cutesy little woodland creatures on the map. So like I said, in Root, what makes this game so great is also its biggest downfall. And that's each faction is completely asymmetric with what you're doing. Essentially, everybody's after the same goal. Everybody's trying to get to 30 victory points first to win the game. So it's just a race up to 30 points. But every faction is getting there in completely different ways. You have the bird faction that is placing cards out in front of them in a decree, and you have to resolve the cards from left to right. And if there's ever a break in that decree where you can't resolve a card in that specific order, then everything falls apart. You lose some victory points, and you have to reset your whole board. And you have like the Marquis des Cats, who are building these sawmills and trying to get wood from the sawmills back to their base camps to make more troops and more buildings, and trying to vie for control over the map in that way. And every faction is just so unique and so different and so fun to play. Really, there's not a faction that I don't like playing, which is really cool. But like I said, the hardest thing with this game is that you do have to learn the faction you're playing with to understand the game fully and to do well. And each faction is just completely different. So it's like learning a new game every time you have to learn a new faction, which makes it a little bit more difficult. But like I said, if you do invest the time into this game and into learning the different factions, and you play with the same group or similar groups, each weekend or every couple weekends, I think this game can become second nature after a while, and it's just a lot of fun. So that's why it's number 15 on my list. My alternate pick for this spot on the list is the Coin series of games, which stands for Counterinsurgency, and it's a huge plethora of games that are out there with that Coin series. The most popular, I would say, is Cuba Libre. I know the first one was called Andean Abyss, and Cuba Libre was the second one. People say that's the easiest one to learn. And I played All Bridges Burning recently, which is, I think, the 13th or 14th Coin series game. But essentially, at its heart, they all have similar mechanisms. It just depends on the difficulty or ease of play you want to jump into. And from what I hear, Cuba Libre is the easiest one to jump into. But at the core, they are card-driven. But what makes it similar to Root is that each of the factions in this game are completely unique, just like Root. So you have to learn the faction you're going to play with each and every time if you're playing with a new faction. So that's what makes it a little bit difficult to get it to the table here again. What's cool about the Coin series of games is that each card has an order of operations on it for what factions get to play their actions first, second, third, and fourth. And the turn order is very, very important in the Coin series of games because you're really trying to swoop in at an opportune moment to do what you need to do to win the game. And if somebody does, an action that you really needed before you, then that can really mess up your plans. So it's another asymmetric faction style series of games that are just card driven and have a simple action on the card or a simple couple different actions you can do with the card. You're just playing down one card on your turn, and that's pretty much it. So the system tries to be streamlined enough and simple enough to understand in that respect, but it provides a lot of strategic depth and a lot of asymmetrical factions that you can really dive into and learn and invest some time into it. And this is another series that is just worth the investment. If you have the time and you wish to make the investment into learning this game, along with Root, if you make the time for it, it will really pay off and is really worth it. So this time on the list in this spot, it is Root. All right, and my number 14 on the list is yet another new game to the list. Call me Cult of the New, call me what you will. Yes. But this game just really jumped up the ranks all the way to number 14 right away for me. It really sung, really liked what it's doing, and honestly, there's a few games that have come out recently with similar mechanisms that I love all of them and really enjoy the core mechanisms. This game is Endless Winter. Endless Winter, the mechanisms that drive this game, and as I've said a million times before, I am a mechanisms-driven type of player, so these mechanisms really speak to me. But this combines deck building with worker placement, but the cards you're building your deck with and drawing cards to your hand with will really dictate what you can do with your workers. And that's true with a few other games that have come out recently, but in Endless Winter, I just really like the way it's done. Some of the other titles that have come out recently, which I'll talk about here in a minute, are a little bit more strict with the card play, where the cards will actually physically tell you where you can place your worker on the board, where in Endless Winter, it's a little bit of a twist to that and a little bit different to where you can place your worker on any spot on the main board to take the action, and the cards in your hand just really kind of bolster that action or upgrade that action to make it better. So it's not really restricting you on your worker placement at all. It is just depending on what cards you build your deck with, that'll either help or hurt your actions in different ways. So that's kind of the fun, unique process with building your deck in this game. Endless Winter, it's kind of a smorgasbord of different things all over the main board. So That might be kind of a turnoff to some people, but I like everything that's going on. It's got a main board that you are, like, example for one of the actions, you can send out these little tents on the main board, and you are trying to do some area control with those tents to get different bonus actions at the eclipse phase at the end of every round. And if you, for example, can surround like 3 of the hexes with tents, enough tents, you can actually create a town in the center of that board, which will give you more area control points to control those areas, to then get you more bonuses with that too, which is really cool. But it's got a bunch of other things going on as well. There's another spot where there's a megalith tile area where you're placing these tiles to get bonus actions out on a separate board, and you've got these different tracks that you're going up, and whoever's the highest on those tracks at the end of the game will score the most victory points for like resources they've gathered and other things too. And there's just a bunch of different things going on, and that can kind of be a turnoff to some people, but I just really like how the cards play into the actions that you're doing so well. There's another spot on the main board in the worker placement spot that you can send your worker to that you are hunting for animals and gathering these animals in front of you. And what's really kind of fun and thematic is that there is an option to, in the future, slaughter those animals for their resources, like for food and or tools and whatnot, or you can keep them in front of you and not slaughter them, keep them alive until the end of the game, and it's got a set collection element to that. The more animals you collect of a certain type of set, the more points you get for those at the end of the game too. So that really creates for some tension and some tight decision making throughout the game where, like, I really need these resources now. So, yeah, sorry, but I have to slaughter the animal for those resources. Or, can I squeeze by without having to slaughter the animal and keep them for endgame scoring? So there's a lot of decision moments throughout the game that I really appreciate that have that tension to it and that tight decision making, which I really appreciate, all with the deck building along with it, which is really cool. My alternative pick for this spot, and one of them that I was alluding to just a couple minutes ago, is The Lost Ruins of Arnak, which is another deck building worker placement game. Like I alluded to also a couple minutes ago, this is one of those games where the card in your hand will actually tell you what different places you can send your workers to. So it's a little bit tighter, a little bit more restrictive. It's got kind of an Indiana Jones theme to the game, which is really neat and really cool, and a theme that I have not seen done ever, which is really fun. It's really fun to play out, and depending on what cards you have in your hand, you can send them to different locations, like these different temples, or explore these different regions of the map, and you can discover these guardians, these big, monsters that are guarding the temple, and you have to defeat those monsters to get victory points and go into the temple to get better actions. And then also you have this research track. So while you're out discovering different lands and discovering these guardians and these different things that you're doing, you're also recording those on this research track, and the higher you get up on the research track, you will trigger different bonuses for yourself along the way. And it'll also give you some end game scoring at the end of the game also. Like I said, it's got some resource conversion and some defeating guardians and exploration, map exploration, and creating some additional worker placement spots as you're discovering these different temples and caves and different things that you're finding. But if you're looking for a game that's a little bit tighter with, a little bit more restrictive with the cards telling you where you can send your workers. For example, there's a Jeep, or there's a boat, or there's an airplane, and different icons on the cards that'll tell you how far out you can go and explore. Then Lost Ruins of Arnak might be more for you, a little bit tighter and more restrictive. But if you're looking for a little bit more loose worker placement play, where the cards are actually just upgrading the action you can do and not really necessarily telling you where you can and can't go, then Endless Winter might be more for you. So this time, in this spot on the list, Endless Winter is what won for me, but both games are fantastic. All right, and my number 13 game is another game that I don't have an alternate pick for because it's just that unique, and it is a really new game as well. So another Cult of the New game for me, and this is Dwellings of Eldervale. Dwellings of Eldervale, another worker placement game where you're placing workers out on these different hex tiles to get you different actions. But what I really appreciate in Dwellings of Eldervale over any other worker placement game, and honestly why it's so high up here on the list this year, is really the player interaction, and also the fact that each worker does something different for you. So each worker has different powers that you can send them out with, like you have a dragon meeple and a wizard meeple and some warrior meeples, and the different meeples or workers have different special abilities abilities associated with them that make you feel a little bit asymmetric and unique from your opponents, because each opponent and yourself start with different factions at the beginning of the game. Also, the player interaction in this game is fantastic. When you're sending one of your workers out to a spot to get the resources or take the action that is associated with that hex tile, you're not safe from that spot. You have these non-player characters that are roaming the map. Also, you have other opponents with their worker placement. And if you collide and run into each other or go to a spot that you wanted that somebody else already took, you are actually initiating combat and you're fighting with them. And depending on how well you do in that combat, that'll mean different things. Like if you win the combat, they get bumped off and they get put into the kill pile, that they can't do anything with that worker for the rest of the round, and then you now took over that spot. Another cool thing with this game is that you are collecting these different like magic cards and other cards that you can place in front of you in your tableau, and those will have specific actions on them as well. And what's fun in this game, it's got a pullback mechanism where when you're done placing all your workers, at the end of all that, you pull your workers back to your main board, but any of the cards or the magic cards, or I forget exactly what they're called, any of them that are face up in front of you in your tableau, or essentially the engine that you're building with that, you can stop off on those cards for those actions before sending them back to your main player board. But any of your workers that were killed on the main map earlier that round just go straight back to your player board. You don't get to trigger any of those actions on your cards. So you really got to be careful that you're putting them in positions or trying to put yourself in a position to win the combat to then take full effect of your magic cards that are in front of you. So it's really cool how the player interaction works in this game and how each of the workers have a little bit different power to them, and each faction has a little bit of a unique power with it as well. And that's what makes Dwellings of Eldervale so much fun. All right, and my number 12 game was number 14 last year, so staying really strong and steady. It is the definition of holding strong in this spot, and it's one of my all-time favorite games by Alexander Pfister, one of my favorite designers of all time. Not my favorite game by him, spoiler alert, but one of my favorites, and this game is Broom Service. Broom Service is just so much ridiculous fun. It's just incredible. I love the way this whole system works. It is a very easy game at heart. Really, all you're doing is collecting potions, and you're flying around the map on these witch brooms and trying to deliver the potions to the different towers and locations that are wanting those color potions. But how you're doing that is where the game really shines. Every player starts the game with the same hand of cards. I think it's like 10 or 12 cards or so, and each card can do something different for you to get those potions and deliver them to the right locations. But at the start of every round, you are secretively picking 4 of those cards to be your hand for that round. Depending on what cards you pick, that'll tell you the different things you can do. What's really fun, and again, multi-use cards, something I really enjoy, this game has it as well. These cards are multi-use cards where it's got a top half and a bottom half. Both actions are a little bit different. Where the top half, it's called the brave action. The bottom half is called the cowardly action. When it's your turn, you are choosing to play a card from your hand down on the table, and right then and there you have to choose whether or not you're doing the brave action or the cowardly action on that card. Now, let's say, for example, I chose the brave action. That action is a little bit better and a little bit stronger than the similar cowardly action, but just, the cowardly action is just not nearly as good. So let's say, for example, I put down a green card, and it'll allow me to pick up, let's say, a couple potions and then move to a green location on the map. And it's the stronger version of that bottom action on the card. Well, if somebody else chose to keep that green card in their hand at the beginning of the round also, they can play their card down now and choose the brave action and completely bump me out. And now my card is completely worthless and does not give me anything. Now, if I would have chosen the cowardly action, yes, it's a weaker action and it gets you less things, less movement, less resources and that sort of thing. But the cowardly action gets you those things immediately. So you don't have to worry about that. But if you want to push your luck and you want to risk it and you want to go for that brave action, you're basically telling yourself that you don't think any of your other opponents kept that card in their hand at the beginning of the turn, so you can get that better action. Or you think that maybe one of your other opponents will just play the same card down but choose the cowardly version of it, because they might think that somebody else down the line from them has the same card as well. So you're playing head games with one another and really toying with each other, and that's what really shines in Broom Service. My alternate pick for this spot on the list is Race for the Galaxy, which is another game where you're really trying to toy with people's heads, and it's Race for the Galaxy essentially is just a card game, and the cards will give you a bunch of different actions on them to try to gather resources to the cards and to turn the resources in for victory points, and each card has different special abilities on it and yada yada yada, all the traditional things. But what's really cool about Race for the Galaxy is that on your turn, you're choosing a specific action that you want to do with your cards. And if somebody else chooses a different action, that's great. They get the better version of it. And you also get a version of that action that's just not quite as good. So you're trying to play in the heads of your opponents on, I really want to do this action and this action here. And I really, really need this action to take place. So I'm going to pick it. But also thinking that one of my opponents will choose the other action that I want is something that you're playing with in your head and something that your opponents are kind of looking toward it as well. I don't know, it's just really cool the way it works, and the mental games you can play between you and your opponents. It's the same thing with Broom Service. That's what I really love about it. But yeah, Race for the Galaxy is also fantastic and is a little bit heavier of a game, I think, than Broom Service. But, Broom Service for what it is, as you can see, it's this high up here on my list. I would play Broom Service any time of day, night, any day of the week. That's how much I love it. All right, and rounding off today's list, here is number 11, and this game was number 11 last year as well, so nothing too exciting. Again, rounding off another video with a little bit lackluster excitement here, but anyway, this game is just fantastic. Like I said, number 11 last year, number 11 this year, holding strong. This game is Heaven and Ale. And Heaven and Ale, it's got a really crazy theme that, take it or leave it, the theme doesn't really pour through in the game hardly at all anyway, but it is a tile placement game that is really tight. And like I said earlier in this segment of the video, that, some games I do really like where it's very, very difficult to get victory points, and it's not, not unique to see a game of Heaven and Ale end where one person only has 2 points or 5 points, or the winner of the game only has 13 or 20 points. So points are very tight in this game. Money's hard to come by, points are hard to come by, everything is just very difficult in this game, but I really, really like it. Another streamlined tile placement game that I appreciate as well. I love how streamlined it is, where you've got a rondelle board in the center board, a circular board. And on your turn, you can skip your worker as far along that track around the board as you would like, but you can't double back. So along the way, you are skipping tiles that you can never go back for, in the future. So you got to be very careful that you are not skipping over tiles that you might really need. But then if you stop on a tile that you need a little bit too early, and one of your opponents behind you jumps over you and goes to a future tile that would have worked really well for you as well, that is the tough part of this game, and that is the strategic choices that this game brings. Depending on the spot you land on the board, that is the tile you will take and place on your main player board. Essentially what you're trying to do is get money along the way to buy more tiles, and then also some of the tiles will trigger to give you more ingredients for your beer. And the more ingredients you get for your beer, the better you upgrade your ingredients, the more points you get at the end of the game. Essentially, what you do with those tiles after you purchase them from the rondelle central board, you can either place it on the shaded side of your board or the sunny side to your board. And when the shaded side tiles trigger in the future, it'll give you money for those. But the sunny side, you actually have to pay double the amount of coins to put those on that side of the board. But when those are triggered, that's how many ingredients of that type it'll get for you. So for example, like a green tile being like the hops for the beer might be a value of 3, but if you put it on the sunny side, it costs you $6 to put it on that side. It would only cost you 3 to put it on the shaded side, so you can trigger it in the future for $3, but costing 6 is quite a bit of money in this game. But when triggered, it'll give you 3 hops ingredients up the track along your board, and the further up the track you get, the better, because at the end of the game, the brewmaster, depending on how far they get up that track, will tell you the ratio that you have to calculate your final scoring. And let's say it's like a 3-to-1 ratio is the spot that it landed on at the end. You take your furthest forward ingredient, the most upgraded ingredient, and for every 3 you move that ingredient back, you get to move your last place ingredient up 1. So it's a 3-to-1 ratio, and eventually all the frontmost ingredients will meet up with the backmost ones somewhere in the center of that track, and where they all pile up in the center is ultimately your end score for the game, plus any like scoring barrels that you've collected through the game for different like missions that you're trying to do. But really you're adding that together with the mission barrels, and your end score, like I said, is very low, very hard to do. You know, it's these games are exciting because everybody is so close, and every decision you make is just so difficult and so tight. So a lot of strategy, and that's what I really appreciate about Heaven and Ale. All right, and that does it for today's list. My game's 20 up to number 11. Hope you all enjoyed. Like I said in the beginning of the video, if you like the content, consider subscribing. Just a click of a button, but it really helps us out a lot. Like the video, add comments below for some of your favorite games of all time. We always like to see what other people are playing and what other games are the best games of all time in other people's eyes. Like I said, if there's a game on there that you list that we haven't played yet, you know, we would love to get it to the table, get it played, and let you know our thoughts on it in a future review video. So that is definitely something that we're looking to do. Also, like I said, we are getting our Patreon page up and running here shortly. So, you know, if you can donate $1 or $2, any amount of money, even if you can't donate, that's fine too. But just to keep the channel improving, even, you know, providing some extra income so we can bring more games to the table. If you're a Patreon supporter, you can vote on what future games we cover, and we're going to use the Patreon money to get those games, bring them into our library, get them played, and review those and use those in future videos for you all to see. So I think the money would be, you know, put to some great use. The money is not going to anything other than just improving the channel, and that's what we're here to do. So we'd really appreciate any support that you can help us with. Until next time, you all have fun gaming and have a great day.